But a lot of questions come up about how is this going to affect me, my professional life? And if I have certifications of sorts, what should I expect with a DUI if
the
and
first,
when?
I mean, as we kind of touched on this earlier, the first thing is potential for losing your license. As I said, we almost all rely on our ability to drive legally to and from work, right? I mean, even in folks that are working at home, you go to meetings, you have to go into the office periodically. You got to meet with clients, vendors, whatever the case may be. So that's number one, is your ability to drive is at stake in many of these cases, in virtually all of them. And so that's number one. And then as far as, every job is different. We get this question often is, what my background? Well, it's hard to answer that. Every job, obviously the higher you go up in society, the more thorough the background check. And so whatever somebody's particular jobs or policies, that certainly could impact your employment with whatever, business or agency you work with. And so, and then, of course, you have professional licensing and things like that, nurses, the people, attorneys, doctors. We all have a professional licensing board to oversee our status. And so in most of those professions, it has in many of them, they have mandatory reporting if you've ever been arrested, and then obviously the annual background check. So all those things, I mean, that's why it's not simply a traffic ticket or a traffic stop.
And I would say there's two big things to note here, which is one, a common misnomer is people don't realize that, one, you have 4 records. You have a driving record, you have an arrest record, you have a criminal record, and you have DFS, CPS, Child Protective Services, Department of Family Services. When you're hiring a criminal defense lawyer, you are hiring them to protect your criminal record and then hopefully do a good enough job to where you can go back and get that arrest record expunged. But the second you're fingerprinted, it's in the system, and it doesn't matter how much money you have or who you hire, there's going to be an arrest record. What I often tell people on first offense DWIs is this is not a life ruiner, this is not a career ruiner. When I get the question of, do I tell my employer, and of course this is always very specific, but more often than not, I tell them if you think it's going to come up, you ought to address it head on, because like we talked about earlier, all walks of life get them. People understand one night of poor judgment more so than they understand a liar or someone who's kind of lying by omission.
Sure.
Now, those are first offense DWIs. You start racking them up, it's a whole different conversation. But I typically say, and I've had friends of all walks of life get DWIs. I mean, there's successful lawyers who've had DWIs. There's judges, doctors. I mean, so again, they're not typically, a first offense is almost never a career or life ruiner. Would you agree, Steve?
Yeah. If it's handled appropriately.
Yes, of course. With
Can
that
they?
caveat,
Can
yes.
they spiral? Yes.
Sure.
If you handle it appropriately, have the right person in your corner, I 100% agree with that. Even in the most difficult of professions, we've become a pretty forgiving society. With what Chris said, I absolutely agree with. Can somebody forgive a lapse in judgment, a poor decision to get behind a wheel? Now if there's an accident involved and injuries, that's a whole different ballgame. But a standard run-of-the-mill first offense DWI, you address it head on. Many times an employer might put you in with their employee assistant program or get some alcohol treatment and vet those things out. But I absolutely agree. We've become a more forgiving. It's not, it's a little different than other crimes in the sense of, crimes of, moral turpitude or burglar. I mean, those things are a different ballgame. But I agree with that. We can generally get you out of this. You're going to jump through some hurdles. This is kind of what I always tell clients. It could be the classes. It could be community service. But we can, in most cases, virtually all first offense, we can get you to the other side of this fairly unscathed. I mean, it's going to cost you some money, and you're going to have to do these things, but I can't recall somebody saying, "Hey, I lost my job."
No. In my entire career, and I've represented almost every profession except I have not represented a judge yet. But I've represented, any other, high-end profession you can name. I can think of one instance, and it was someone who wanted to work for Anheuser-Busch, and they have a no-tolerance policy. But he ended up becoming an investment banker and is doing quite well. So, and he's registered with the SEC and has all those licenses,
Right.
federal licenses. So didn't stop him from that. But that's that is literally the only time. He kind of had a dream that he wanted to be a brewer and start his own brewery, and he wanted to start there to get experience. But, that's the only time I could ever think of someone's, and he didn't have a job and lose it. He just wanted to work there, and that was disqualified him.
Sure.
But
Well,
again,
it's good to know. It's
yeah,
good to know on an ethics standpoint. That's not something they should spend a lot of time worrying about, especially on a first offense.